It's really my pleasure to welcome you all to this very special event. Just before we start, it's just a small housekeeping announcement, which is to say that unfortunately, our lift is out of order, but so if you need to use the stairs to get to the top, to the bathrooms, they're quite clearly signposted, but please do ask a member of staff if you need to. And as far as the fire alarm goes, if it does go off, it's highly unlikely, then please do just wait so that we can check off our list that everyone is safe and sound, rather than heading home. That would really help us. So thank you. Okay, so this evening, it's an incredibly special event. We're honored that Menachem Rosensaft, who's traveled from the United States to be with us this week, will be speaking with Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg about Menachem's book, Burning Psalms, Confronting Adonai after Auschwitz, which is a remarkable collection of poems and meditations. The Wiener Holocaust Library has a special link now with Menachem, because Menachem has well, you've known the library for a long time, and it's been a special connection since David Cesarani was director here. But that relationship has now deepened still further, because just this week, Menachem presented the library with a very special Hebrew Bible, which was gifted to him as a baby when he was born in the Bergen-Belsen DP camp, which we will treasure among our special collections. And it's even more special that that gift was made on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Belsen. Currently, our exhibition, Traces of Belsen, is bringing the history of the camp, so often seen through the lens of the horrific images of liberation, but where there's so much more of the story to be told. And we're very proud that the Wiener Library's rich collections have been shown to very good effect. And I'm delighted also to see Hepzibah Rudowski, who was one of the people we worked with to showcase the powerful family collections that we have on display here. So I would encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance this evening to have a proper look at the exhibition, please do visit. It's on until the 10th of July, and I'd love you also to spread the word about the exhibition to your friends. So, to come to this evening's event, Burning Psalms is a book which confronts the pain, the anger, and the questions that so many survivors and their families have carried with them since the Holocaust. It's a book that doesn't shy away from the greatest difficulties of this catastrophic, momentous event. It asks how one can pray or even speak to God, have a relationship with God after such devastation. At the same time, the beauty of the poetry gives us moments of hope and really engages us deeply with the Jewish tradition and liturgy. So I'm very honored that Menachem is here to speak about the book with us this evening. It's incredibly poignant to do so, of course, in a situation when so many of us are feeling heartbroken and outraged by the tragic murder of the Israeli embassy staff, Yaron Lachinsky and Sarah Milgram, which occurred during an event centered on humanitarian aid to support innocent lives in both Gaza and Israel. These issues that we're confronting tonight, I think, have never been more urgent. So thank you all for joining us. Menachem will be in conversation, which I will help to facilitate, I hope, with Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg. Jonathan, it's wonderful to have you with us. Jonathan also is a long-standing friend of the Wiener Holocaust Library. His deep understanding, again, of Jewish faith and Jewish life needs no introduction. His teachings and books have inspired so many, and he continues to work tirelessly. And it's so impressive to see Jonathan's work building bridges between communities and generations. So thank you very much, Jonathan. But we'll begin by hearing from Menachem Rosensaft, who will speak to us about his book, Burning Psalms. Menachem.
Thank you very much, Toby. It is a singular honor for me to be here at the Wiener Library, and I want to thank you and your colleagues for having me here. It means a great deal to me, and it means a great deal to me to be able to have a conversation with Rabbi Wittenberg, whom I admire and whose writings I've been reading for many years. Most, if not all of us, are familiar with the biblical Psalm 23, which is often recited at funerals. A song of David, Adonai, my shepherd, I shall not want. God, make me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul and leads me in the path of righteousness for the sake of God's name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Adonai forever. This particular psalm, a staple of both Jewish and Christian liturgy, is portrayed as a calming presence in our turbulent world, meant to be simultaneously a messenger and reminder of peace and serenity, of God's ultimate protection. And yet, this psalm sounds incongruous, atonal, when set against the background of the Holocaust, in Hebrew, the Shoah, of the millions who were systematically, brutally murdered and who were abandoned, forsaken, not just by the world, but by God. Thus, my burning Psalm 23 strikes a different note. A psalm to the emptiness, no shepherd, only foes, no festive table, only bitter soup, moldy bread, no green pastures, no still waters, only blood-drenched, rat-infested mud. He is always hungry. She is always cold, their head anointed by blows, shadows walking through the valley of death, Adonai's fog-wrapped house forever. In the introduction to, in his introduction to his translation of the Book of Psalms, Robert Alter called it the most urgently personally present of all the books of the Bible in the lives of many readers. At a papal audience in 2020, the late Pope Francis said that Psalms, and I quote, are invocations, often dramatic, that spring from lived existence. In the Psalms, he went on, suffering is transformed into a question, from suffering to questioning. The original Psalms are simultaneously a celebration of God, a recognition of the wonders God performed in biblical times, and an acknowledgement of the comparative moral weakness of human beings who can only strive to approach God's righteousness, loving kindness, and mercy. They became an integral part of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, more than 2,500 years ago. As we read the biblical Psalms, we are meant to be comforted by them. But in the aftermath of the Holocaust, we do not read them by ourselves. Hovering over us are ghosts who force us to reconsider the Psalms against the realities of Auschwitz and Treblinka, of Majdanek, Babi Yar, Ponary, and Bergen-Belsen. Again and again, we are told that God, Adonai, is and always has been merciful and compassionate, that Adonai is our rock, our fortress, our redeemer, acting with loving kindness and protecting us from evil and evildoers. And yet we know that no such divine intervention, no such divine assistance was forthcoming, that no divine loving kindness manifested itself at Auschwitz or Treblinka, at Majdanek, Babi Yar, Ponary, or Bergen-Belsen. The burning Psalms are my reactions and replies to the biblical Psalms, written from the perspective of a son of two survivors of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, whose families, including my 5.5-year-old brother, were murdered in the Holocaust. I wrote them as a Jew who believes or wants to believe in God, but who has been unable to harmonize intellectually or spiritually the palpable absence of God during the Shoah with the essence of God, of Adonai, as portrayed in the biblical Psalms. My goal in trying to reconceptualize the original Psalms was to try to bring the fundamental theological enigma represented by the Holocaust squarely into Jewish liturgy by invoking the ghosts who haunt us and giving them a place and a voice in our ongoing dialogue with God. The question that pervades each of my burning Psalms is the one that does not have a satisfactory answer. Namely, how can we praise God for saving the Israelites fleeing Egypt by parting the waters for them, when we know that the same God did not rescue some 6 million Jews from annihilation at the hand of Nazi Germany and its accomplices? How can we justify praising and thanking God throughout our liturgy for performing miracles in biblical times, while studiously ignoring the reality that no such divine miracles were forthcoming during the Holocaust? None of us can presume to know God's essence or God's countenance. If, however, we wish to continue to interact with God, with Adonai after Auschwitz, as Avinu Malkeinu, our parent and sovereign, in the same way we did before Auschwitz, then we have not just the right, but the obligation to bring the ghosts of Auschwitz into our dialogue with God, with Adonai. The biblical Psalm 120 asks Adonai to, quote, save my soul from false lips, from a deceitful tongue, before concluding with a sense of relief that, and I quote, for a long time my soul dwelled with those who hate peace. I am at peace. In contrast, my burning Psalm 120 takes us into the depths of the Shoah. An elegy from the dead for the dead. In my distress, I called to you, Adonai, but you did not answer me, did not save my soul from cursing lips, did not protect me from malignant tongues, honed arrows, disguised as pernicious word. Die Juden sind unser Unglück, the Jews are our misfortune, turned into fists. Kauft nicht bei Juden, don't buy from Jews, turned into cudgels. Jüdische Weltverschwörung, Jewish world conspiracy, turned into mobs, Saujude, filthy Jew. Beard shorn in the streets, Untermensch, subhuman, burning synagogue, Rassenvergiftung, poisoning of the race, ransacked homes, Jude verrecke, die Jew. Jews burned alive in synagogue. Wenn das Judenblut vom Messer spritzt, when Jewish blood spurts from the knife. Ghettos, Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse, extermination of the Jewish race, slaughter, Judenfrei, free of Jew, cleanse of Jews, rid of Jews. German laughter, cursing lips, malignant tongues, pernicious words were only the beginning. I was shot at Pernari, inhaled Cyclone B at Birkenau, carbon monoxide at Treblinka. Typhus ravaged my soul in Belsen barracks, and I am not at peace in the grave. Writing in early 1944, while the gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau were operating in full force, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the foremost Jewish philosophers of the 20th century, asked the most basic and most critical of all theological questions. And I quote, "The day of the Lord is a day without the Lord. Where is God? Why dost thou not halt the trains loaded with Jews being led to slaughter?" End quote. This question, which was asked in one form or other by Jews in the ghettos and camps of the Holocaust, is studiously avoided in post-Holocaust Jewish liturgy. It is also the very question that must, in my opinion, be transposed into precisely that liturgy. To a large extent, we express our faith in and devotion to God through the biblical psalm that are interspersed throughout the Jewish liturgy, and in which God is consistently praised and exalted. This idyllic, harmonious relationship with and to God depends on our not confronting God with the reality and horrors of the Holocaust, because we know that there can be neither praise nor exaltation for God in the context of Auschwitz, Treblinka, the Warsaw Ghetto, Babi Yar, or Bergen-Belsen. My father was once asked if he still believed in God after surviving numerous German deaths in concentration camps. I do not hold the Rabbeinu Shalom, the master of the universe, responsible for the Holocaust, he replied. But I won't give him any medals for it either. I believe Ani Ma'amin with perfect faith, Be'emunah Shlema, in the coming of the Messiah, is the 12th of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith. But how can we reconcile such absolute trust with the failure of the Messiah, any Messiah, to appear at the nadir of Jewish history? The Yiddish poet Shmerke Kaczerginski, a survivor of the Vilna Ghetto, enunciated this fundamental spiritual and theological quandary in his song, his poem, Soll schon kommen die Geule, Let the Redemption Come Already, when he pleaded with the Tatele in Himmel, the Father in heaven, that the Messiah shouldn't arrive on the scene a bissele zu spät, a little too late. Burning Psalm 22. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Adonai, Adonai, compassionate and gracious God. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema be'viat HaMashiach. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah. Eli, Eli, lama azaftani. My God, why have you forsaken me? Children, 1.5 million children, each the son, the daughter of Adonai, each a Shabbat candle brutally extinguished, each betrayed, abandoned by a savior who refused to come, whom you did not send. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum, compassionate God. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema. I believe with perfect faith. Lama azaftani. Why have you forsaken me? And then we remember that according to the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, the last words uttered by Jesus as he was being murdered on the cross, albeit in Aramaic rather than in Hebrew, was this precise phrase from the biblical Psalm 22. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? It is a reminder that the anguish at being abandoned by God is not a new phenomenon, and that it is by no means limited to or novel in the Jewish experience during the Holocaust. But this awareness also forces us to reflect on the fact that Jesus, who was a Jew, and his apostles and disciples, who were also all Jews, would all have been persecuted and murdered as Jews during the years of the Holocaust by men and women who were Christians, or at a minimum were born Christians. Burning Psalm 55 Redux. Returning in one final ice wind, not on doves or eagle's wings, the Messiah, real, false, imagined, and his father, both pale, both bearded, both frail, were immediately recognized as racially impure by an efficient Aryan prototype who knew his catechism. Burning Psalm 125 Redux. The Messiah will not come, will not leave Adonai's seclusion until Jerusalem's bearded rabbis, imams, priests teach daily that each Jewish child, Palestinian infant, is created with one, only one, always the same divine spark. In Burning Psalms, in what may well be the ultimate manifestation of chutzpah, I have tried to place myself in the mindset of my brother in a Birkenau gas chamber on the night of August 3rd to 4th, 1943. I have tried to place myself in the mindset of my parents as they realized that their entire families had been murdered. I have tried to place myself in the mindset of the victims of the Holocaust as they were confronted with, overwhelmed by the horrors of the Holocaust, and to address Adonai, to question Adonai, mima makim, from the depths. Burning Psalm 18. Benjamin Prazerovich, my mother's son, was 5 years and 8 months old when he was murdered in a gas chamber at Auschwitz-Birkenau on the night of August 3rd to 4th, 1943. A song from the dead, for the shadow fading reflection of Benjamin, who spoke these words to Adonai on the day that Adonai did not save him from the hand of all his enemies. And he said, I once loved you, Adonai. I believed, I was taught you were my strength, my rock, my fortress, where I would be safe, my salvation. Adonai, Adonai, I believed, I was taught you are compassionate, abounding in loving kindness and faithfulness. In my distress, I called to you, Adonai, but the ground did not tremble. The world's foundations remained unshaken. You did not roar, did not even whisper. You did not bend the heavens, did not come down from your palace to lift me out of the suffocation. What did I ever do to deserve your silence, your indifference? Was David, who seduced Bathsheba, who sent Uriah to his death, whom you did not allow to build your temple, more faithful than I, more righteous, more blameless? And yet you rescued David from his enemies, but left me gasping for air, gas filling my lungs, on a cold cement floor as the cords of death choked me, overwhelmed me, dragged me to your Sheol. No, Adonai, you did not protect me with your shield. Your right hand did not sustain me. You did not set me free, did not hold me, cradle me, comfort me. Therefore, you will not light up my eyes or revive my heart, not even with a rainbow, and I will not sing to you again. Let us bear in mind that nothing about Auschwitz, nothing about Birkenau, nothing about the Holocaust for that matter, was logical or made sense. The only thing we can do is not to try to understand, but to remember. Burning Psalm 148. Your angels may want to acclaim you, Adonai. Kings and princes, rabbis and priests, imams and patriarchs may want to magnify your name. But the ghosts of Auschwitz remind us that you must not be praised from the heavens, that your name should not be exalted on high. The earth and oceans, the mountains and all the hills, fruit trees and all the cedars are your splendor. But the ghosts of Auschwitz remind us that they haunt your eternity. The animals and birds remind us of the freedom brutally torn away from your people. The heavens and the waters above the heavens remind us of your vast universe that could have been but never became a sanctuary. Snow and hail remind us that the children of Israel were forced to stand for hours outside their barracks in the freezing cold, day after day during winter roll calls. The sun and moon remind us that they looked on, that you looked on in silence as millions were slaughtered. The stars of light blanketing the sky remind us of the 1.5 million Jewish children whose lights were extinguished. Stormy winds raging into the night remind us of no longer breathable air in Zyklon B chambers. Fire and smoke remind us of crematory flames consuming flesh and bones, leaving behind only ashes. The ghosts of Auschwitz remind us that you did not keep your faithful close to you, that they were left to die alone. The biblical Psalm 150 is a prominent part of the Jewish liturgy, calling for God to be glorified with a symphonic array of musical instruments, with shofar blast, with a psaltery and harp, with timbrel and dance, with stringed instruments and flute, with resounding cymbals. Hallelujah b'tziltzilei shama, hallelujah b'tziltzilei trua. Let every good soul praise God, hallelujah. Kol hanshama hallelujah, hallelujah. But what if these orchestral reverberations are in reality a white noise of sort that ominously deflects us from a disconcerting cosmic silence? The Bible knows of God hiding his face, wrote Martin Buber, of time when the contact between heaven and earth seems to be interrupted. The space of history is then full of noise, but empty of the divine breath. For one who believed in the living God, who knows about him, and is fated to spend his life in a time of his hiddenness, it is very difficult to live. And so allow me to conclude this part of our program this evening in counterpoint to biblical Psalm 150, before I'll have the enormous privilege to engage in conversation with Rabbi Wittenberg with my burning Psalm 150. No hallelujahs, no shofar blasts, no crashing cymbals. We do not praise you, Adonai, cannot praise you for hiding your face at Birkenau, at Treblinka, at Belsen. The lute and lyre are silenced. The strings and flute intone muted elegies. And every breath of life, every breath of the living asks you, why?
Thank you so much, Menachem. So incredibly thought-provoking introduction. I think the way that we're going to do this, if it's okay with both of you, is that we'll start with giving Rabbi Wittenberg the opportunity to ask some questions for as long as you would like, Jonathan. And then once you've had a chance to converse, we can do this sort of in concentric circles, so that I'll then pose a couple of questions, as it were, from the outside, in the sense that I'm somebody that was not raised within the Jewish tradition. And so I have already some thoughts and questions which I'd like to ask, but I'll be brief, because I know that there will also be a desire to ask questions in the audience. So we'll do it in those three stages, if that's okay. So to begin, I'll pass over to you, Rabbi Wittenberg.
So first of all, I just want to pay tribute to the fact that the burning psalms they deeply grow out of your experience, your brother who was murdered, being born in the DP post-Bergen-Belsen, your parents' experience, and the profound sense of your immersion in the aftermath of all of this comes over constantly. And I just want to just respect that in your work. The Psalms leave me with a lot of different thoughts. But I wanted to ask you, first of all, if I'm right in your introduction, you say you're a person who, and I think I wrote this down, I made some notes, that you want to believe in God, or you haven't lost a sense of belief in God. Where is that in you? Or I didn't see it in the book, I have to say. What impels you to feel that you want to continue to believe in a God? You could have been a Richard Dawkins, lahavdil, lahavdil, or lahavdil. But something in you is compelling you to engage with this ancient literature of our people, and not to abandon a sense of at least looking for the divine, although the divine is always absent.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for asking what is genuinely the most difficult question.
I apologize now.
And the problem with certain questions is that the answers are by definition personal. And I can only speak for myself. There is a difference between liturgy and theology. There is a profound difference between liturgy and theology. The question you are asking is a theological question. And there are a number of options that one is left with. One is the Richard Rubinstein, or shall we say Nietzsche option, God is dead and we have killed him. it's an option, but it also means that everything else we are doing every single day on Shabbat, on the holidays, is meaningless. If we accept that premise, then every single time we say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, we are saying something that we do not believe in.
There may be other causes for saying it, sociological,
That,
communal,
yeah, I know, but I'm talking now theologically. The other options are more complicated. You can use the option of Martin Buber or Yit Greenberg of God averting his countenance, of Tzimtzum, of the mystical disappearance. But again, if that is a voluntary act on the part of God of withdrawing, then we have to recognize that God could just as easily voluntarily revert that decision and return. So my own way of thinking it is, I don't think any of us have a sense of who or how God manifests himself, of what is the divine presence, what is God's countenance. I, for one, do not believe that God is, the only or the most prominent artistic depiction of God is in the Sistine Chapel on the ceiling, where Michelangelo depicted God as this white bearded man reaching out his hand to create Adam. The cynic in me says that if God is all powerful, why would he want to depict himself as an old Jew? But that's
the cynic in me says something worse. The shul couldn't afford to employ him to put it on their ceiling.
Exactly. But I have the sense that there was a divine presence during the Holocaust that I do want to believe in. And that is the divine presence within Jews, within the victims who refused to become dehumanized. The ability to share a piece of bread when one is hungry with one who might be hungrier, to comfort a child walking into a gas chamber, to tell a joke or sing a song in a barrack in order to lift someone else's spirit. I find that was the manifestation of the Shekhinah. It was what was kept, it was within my mother and a group of other women in Bergen-Belsen who kept 149 children alive through the bitter cold and typhus-ridden winter of 1944 to 1945. And it was also, this was a divine presence within every non-Jew who risked their lives to help or hide or save a Jew. And that divine presence was absent from the perpetrators. It was absent from those who looked away, who chose to do nothing.
Yeah, a very interesting moment in the much of what you said doesn't speak to you, doesn't speak to me either. I think the concept of Hester Panim, that God voluntarily hides the divine face and then voluntarily, you have to then attribute immorality, cruelty, or ill will to God. And rather than having as a question, you have to make that attribution. So it really doesn't work for me. But there's a moment with the Piazetzner Rebbe, the Rebbe Kalman Shapira, in which he records, and I think we're talking June 41 or 42, I think it's June 41, in which he says this remarkable piece. So the voice of God dividing into two channels. He's a Kabbalist. The divine comes through emanation. It's predominantly immanent in his thinking, as you've just said. Divides into the world of Torah and the world of nature. So you can hear it in the lowing of cows, the chirping of birds, in human discourse. How he hears that in the Warsaw Ghetto, I don't know. But then he says it's even to be heard hidden and perverted and buried within the evil that's manifest. And that part of his statement, I really struggle to go along with.
Well, I mean, the first part of his statement, of course, mean that he probably would not have excommunicated Spinoza, but that's a different argument. No, I'm not saying that's it. He would not have excommunicated Spinoza. It's a
nor would most Kabbalists or Hasidim.
No, exactly. That's but I'm saying it seriously, and I firmly disagree. Obviously, again, you cannot disagree. You cannot take issue with anything that someone said in that period, because that was their coming to terms with it. And by the way, Shapiro said that before the Holocaust was in full force. This was in June of 41. I'm not sure that he would have said it had he known about the gas chambers and the crematoria that were to come. But that
it is a consistent tone through to his writings. The last we have is January 43.
Yeah, but okay,
so sure.
but maybe not. But what I want to just revert to is there is a difference between theology and liturgy, because what we've been talking about now means basically upending, in a very real sense, our concept of God and our relationship with God. And that is fine. I mean, one can do that. But the liturgy that we're engaged in is the glue that holds us together. Is the glue that holds us together as a people, that brings us to your shul or to my shul or to any other shul, whether it's Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Renewal, Masorti, it doesn't matter. We engage in a liturgy. It is a liturgy that, in my view, is lacking in that it does not recognize the existence of the Shoah.
I mean, overtly it doesn't, except on particular occasions in the year. But I guess I've never really believed in the God whom your Psalms so much challenge. I've always seen these as problematic propositions, and I also experience the liturgy that way. So I say something, and I say it because, for the reasons that you've said, this is the glue that holds us together, not just in the Jewish past, but with the long, in Jewish present, with the long Jewish past. But I feel it challenges me. So what on earth can I mean by that? Line after line. There's some wonderful, I think, examples of that even within the liturgy. A poem from, I think, the Second Crusade, which reads Shema Yisrael as not Israel, oh here, but God, why are you failing to listen to your people? And indeed, one of the examples you took, Hashem, Hashem, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, which concludes the martyrology on Yom Kippur. And the force of it is thinking, so you, God, are proclaimed as merciful and gracious. How can this be? So I think I read the liturgy constantly with interrogation and a lack of answer. So it once engages me and is impossible to me and embraces me.
I fully understand what you're saying, but you made one point: a prayer, a poem that was written after the Second Crusade, and that was introduced, integrated into the service. In other words, that was in reaction to an event, a traumatic event. And that has happened repeatedly. Somewhere in the 7th or 8th century of the Common Era, somebody wrote a poem, Kol Nidre, which has become one of these staples of Jewish liturgy. A Kabbalist, after the expulsion from Spain in Tzvat, writes a poem, Yedid Nefesh, which becomes integrated. I think it was around September of 1948, the then Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yitzhak Halevi Herzog, the grandfather of the present president,
yes,
and father of the former president. This is now in September 1948. The Israeli War of Independence is raging. And he writes a poem, Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzur Israel Begoalo, our Father in heaven, a rock. It's a prayer for the protection of the state of Israel, for the protection of the soldiers. This poem is given to his close friend and not yet Nobel laureate Shai Agnon. And it is now a part of just about every service of every denomination, from Orthodox to Reform, which indicate the centrality, the importance of the state of Israel to Jewish existence, to Jewish identity. It is a prayer that could not have been written in 1935 or 1850, but after 1948, it is necessary for us. And to my way of thinking, we need a constant reminder of the Shoah in our liturgy, not on Yom HaShoah only, when those who come, and those who don't. Not at the end of the martyrology as an afterthought on Yom Kippur for those who are still in shul. I mean, we need it in a way that others who are not necessarily wrapped into the liturgy as you are, as others are reminded that the Shoah occurred, are reminded that this was an event. One of the Talmudists whom I greatly respected of the Holocaust survivor, David Weiss Halivni,
yes,
who wrote at one point that there was 2 moments of revelation in Jewish history. Sinai, when God revealed his face, and Auschwitz, when God withheld his countenance. It's a reality, and everyone comes to it with a different perception, with a different thought. But we need to at least have the reminder in the liturgy in some way. And again, I don't have the chutzpah or the presumption of thinking that my Psalms are the answer. But I would be enormously gratified if they manage to provoke a discussion, because one of the things that we have to remember, we are at a particularly critical moment in our history. Toby mentioned before the 80th anniversary of the liberation. For the past 80 years, the survivors have carried the burden, and we have not only allowed them, that's the wrong term, but we have deferred to them. They are the ones who stood there and told us what happened to them. They were, in the word of historian Lucy Davidovich, once describing my father, they were the ancient mariner going from place to place, speaking in tongues. But they were there. They were the ones who were there. That period is coming to an end. It is dwindling, not for any outside purposes, but because of a reality of life. on the 80th anniversary at Bergen-Belsen, there were 56 survivors. By definition, they were in their 80s. Those with memories were in their late 80s or early 90s. That process is going to continue on a downward slope. And so if we want Holocaust memory to be integrated into our consciousness, we have to figure out how to do it. And to me, the one place that is a glue is our liturgy. And we have to figure out a way of doing it. And it's a discussion which, as you know better than I, most rabbis and most theologians have chosen to avoid.
Can I make a couple of comments? One is, first, I'll put different sides, but actually I don't disagree with you on this point at all, but just sort of affirming what you said, the classic book by Chaim Yosef Yerushalmi, Zachor, remember, tries to answer the question as to why Jews have, until the modern period, not written so much history. It's not been a classic genre through the Jewish literature. I mean, the premise is questioned, actually. There are those who think he's not right with that premise, but his answer is because it's in the liturgy. That's how we as Jews remember. It's in the liturgy. So that establishes your point. I'll put a different perspective, not because I disagree with it, but because I think for the sake of discussion, it's important. I was also just recently, the BBC asked me to record the Sunday worship program on the 26th January, the Sunday before National Holocaust Memorial Day here and in Europe, and asked me to follow the story that I wrote of my father's family. So I was with my son, we were in conversation, and my nephew actually works for the BBC, recorded it, at Birkenau. And he asked me, not cynically, what do I think the importance of the memory of this is in the Jewish consciousness? And there was a lot to say about it, but I wanted to add, and this troubles me, that, and I know that many rabbis have the same concern. If you ask people how they identify as Jews, and the Pew Report in the States looked at that in the early 21st century, top of the list comes the Holocaust, next comes Israel, and very low down comes belief in God or engagement with Jewish life. And I want my congregation to engage in Jewish life for the love of Judaism and for its strength. And I do worry that the role of the Holocaust in the Jewish consciousness has its essential presence, but also its dangers. And those are parts, sometimes they're expressed, they're sometimes expressed politically, and they're sometimes expressed by, this is what Judaism is. And those things trouble me.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, look, on a very basic, very basic premise, if you tell a young person that the reason to be Jewish is because people try to murder you, there's a very simple answer to it, and that, okay, then I won't be Jewish and I won't have the problem. So that's not a. The
trouble is
no.
that the non-Jews don't believe that.
No, I understand. I understand. Look, this is the Soviet Jewish writer, Ilya Ehrenburg, who was one of the, probably the only one who managed to get through this Stalinist period and beyond with his head on his shoulder, identifying as a Jew at one point in the 1950s or early 60s, I don't remember when, but he was in Paris and being interviewed, I think it was a JTA interview even, in which he basically said, I am Jewish because of the anti-Semites. If it weren't for the anti-Semites, I would have no reason to be Jewish. So that meets your point. But my My argument, though, is a different one. I agree with you that the Holocaust, or Israel for that matter, should not be our principal or sole basis for identification as Jews. But I don't think you would argue that that is a reason for not including.
Absolutely. Indeed,
And for me, the issue is, how do we find a balance in order to bring the Shoah into our liturgy in pretty much the same way that Avinu Shebashamayim does, in that it is a reminder. It is something there that causes one to say, oh, wait a second, there is Israel, or the prayers that are being said for the hostages. They're there. They're not, they don't take, I'm not suggesting that we in any way get rid of the ritual that we have. I'm saying, let's add something. Let's add something so that a young kid turns to their parent and says, why is, or their rabbi or their teacher, why is this prayer here? What does it mean? Which will give, sort of along the Pesach, Agadah, a reason for someone to answer in the appropriate fashion for the person asking. This is because, and we look, we have it in on the Passover Seder. In every generation, each of us should view ourselves as if we had come out of Egypt. It doesn't say we should view ourselves as having suffered in Egypt. It should not say that we should view ourselves as having gone through the sea. It says we should view ourselves as if we had emerged. We should have that experience as part of our consciousness. Well, I think the Shoah deserves us saying we should view ourselves as remembering that this had happened and figuring out how it fits into our identity.
Couple of thoughts. One is, I just wanted a kind of footnote to what you just said, and then I just want to ask you a very different question, if that's okay. The footnote is that there is a contrast between the Haggadah and the Siddur. Both of them have many commentaries, but the commentaries to the Siddur tend to be relatively obscure, quite often in medieval Hebrew. The Haggadah is the most printed Jewish book, with hundreds. You can get a Bundeshalacha, you can get a Haggadah from the Southern armies in the United States Civil War. You can get the vegetarian Haggadah. There's some of them. One of them I got, I'm vegetarian, it's terrible. But what you have on the same page is the commentary that interrogates the standard text. So you've got the text and the difficult, the impossible question on the same page, and you sit there and you read it together. And if it's not on the page, it's on the person opposite you at the Seder table, who, as you say, is a survivor or a child of survivors, or fled some other persecution. The Siddur doesn't do that adequately. And when I think of some of what you say, the kind of Siddur I like has those questions in it, and not just in one's head. And I would put, for example, the traditional Shema next to Yehuda Levi, next to Primo Levi's Shema. Mm-hmm. You who live in warm houses. Think about it. So the interrogation of our liturgy seems to me also a way to do that and to make it conscious rather than, my God, this doesn't speak about the God I believe in at all. Where do I go from here? So that's what I'll put that. I'm going to put you something very different. Towards the end of the book, and it's one of the things that particularly touches me, moves me. You have a long piece about Srebrenica, and then you have a very contemporary piece, which talks about the Jewish child, the Israeli child, the Palestinian child, the Arab child. And you emphasized all made in the image of God. I've just had to write something for the Sunday Times about the blockade and aid in Gaza, writing the same sort of point. I'm interested in what made you move from the Psalms to want to include those universal testaments to suffering? I think it's a very important part of your book.
Thank you. I'm gratified, deeply gratified, because that was my point. I did not want it to be, we're dealing with the Shoah, we're dealing with a psalm, with psalms relating to the Shoah, and that's it. Our world is continuing, and not necessarily in a good way. We know that. We just had it in the past 24 hours in Washington, D.C. with the horrible killing of the appalling killing of two young Israelis. But we have it, quite frankly, we had it on October 7th. We had it in when Palestinian children are being killed in Gaza. And I'm not suggesting anything about whether or not the war is legitimate or not. That is a political discussion which one can have, and I have very strong views on the topic. And they're not necessarily views that would be viewed with sympathy in the ministries in Jerusalem at the moment, but that's not the point. The point is the suffering is ongoing. Srebrenica is there because Srebrenica was a genocide, and the people murdered in that genocide are no less deserving of remembrance and of our being part of our consciousness than the Jews who perished, who were murdered during the Shoah. And somewhere, somehow, people have to start thinking that when children are being killed, something is wrong. One of the few heroes to emerge from October 7th in Israel, and there were others. I'm not suggesting there were not. A lot of the defense, the security folks in the various kibbutzim did heroic work. But one of the kind of out-of-the-box heroes was a man named Yair Golan. Yair Golan, Yair Golan is a former deputy chief of staff of the IDF. He is the Israel Defense Forces. He is now is the head of the left-wing labor merits party called Democracy.
There's a lot of trouble today, actually, I think.
Well, that's what I'm about.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to put him in context, he, on October 7th, was a private citizen. He got into his Jeep, he drove down, he extricated people from Nova, he rescued people. He just basically said, he did what nobody else in that thing did. He got into a lot of trouble over the past 48 hours by making a statement that is being denounced by many, and I understand the statement, that a normal country does not make a hobby out of killing children.
I just on that point, I saw that headline, and having written about the question of starvation just today, one of the things that really troubles me is this, that the murders in Washington are absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
And we know the names, and actually one of them grew up in Germany and was a good friend of one of my colleagues in Germany. I didn't know that until shortly before I came. I don't actually know the names of the people who are dying in Gaza. I don't know any of their names. And I felt difficult writing in horror about those two and not being able to write with the same human contact in any way about what was happening in Gaza. And the piece which you stressed, and I totally am with you there, every human life is created in God's image. We might want to preclude the utterly wicked, but is created in God's image. I sit very uncomfortably with myself in these times.
Can I ask a question about the grappling that you're doing right now? Because I'm conscious of the fact that we're with time, and I do want to give a chance for others. And so I just want to ask one question. And because we're in the Wiener Library, I think a lot of people who come here, and over the past 12 years that I've been working here, I've seen this countless times, confront, just as the book title suggests, confront Auschwitz, confront as a symbolic idea, but also, and that point you just made about if with children dying, it made me think of something very personal, because the first time I was really felt I was personally grappling with the horror was actually talking to someone who donated documents to us, a woman called Gina Burgess-Winning, who some of you may know. And she donated this very beautiful set of crayons that belonged to her uncle. And she had become an artist. And she also showed me her drawings. And there was something about those crayons of this boy that was murdered. She also showed me a swastika that was on the leather pencil case. And that was a mysterious symbol, because she didn't know how that swastika came to be there. Did her uncle draw it himself? Was it done by a bullying classmate? And there was something about the tragedy, the unsolved, the specificity that I just found totally shattering. And I think a lot of people who come to this place have similar experiences. So I just wanted, paraphrasing a historian who's upstairs at the moment, he says every thinking person has to grapple with the Holocaust because it happened. That's a duty in a way, in his view. And I wonder if that resonates. There's this, of course, we've been talking so much about the Jewish tradition, but there's also this universal grappling that happens. And I just wonder if you would agree that every thinking person must grapple with the Holocaust.
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first? Yes, I would. But I think that in a way, broadening that out, every thinking person must grapple with the unwarranted, unjustifiable cruelty that is part of what we see in the world, and the fact that you cannot square the notion of a beneficent deity who deals justly with the reality we see constantly before our eyes. It's epitomized in the Holocaust, but that's not its only manifestation in the history of humankind. And we have to absolutely grapple with it. And interestingly, one of the ways in which Jewish theology has tried to treat this, and I think we probably agree it's not super satisfactory, is to take the God who's all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, and to critique the all-powerful. There's stuff God can't do. So God is also a victim of the Holocaust, abused. Thus Hugo Grinn in his Chasing Shadows, abused by the contempt shown to human beings. I was talking about this and I bumped into the corridors. It was in Holland at a limud with Rabbi Nathan Cardoso.
Yes.
And he just said to me, I wouldn't necessarily take out the all-powerful, just remove the all-good. And that has so stuck with me. But yes, I think if we're going to be serious about the human condition, we have to grapple with these issues.
Look, to do a little bit of paraphrasing of the famous adage of Hillel, if we don't remember the Holocaust and make it part of our consciousness, what's the point of our being? And if we only deal with the Holocaust, who are we as human beings? We can't be saying, look, I teach on the law of genocide. I teach my students that the Holocaust is not more heinous, more horrendous than other genocide or crimes against humanity. It's different. Each in a way, I tell them that, I use the Tolstoy opening lines of Anna Karenina. Each happy family is alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own particular way. That is true of genocide. That is true of crimes against humanity. Do not lump them all together and create some kind of mass. But it does mean that a Muslim Bosniak killed at Srebrenica deserves the same remembrance as a Jew murdered in Auschwitz, and a Palestinian child starving in Rafah is no different from a Jewish child starving in the Warsaw Ghetto, and a child being killed on October 7th, an Israeli Jewish child, is no different from a child being killed for whatever reasons. And we need to remember that. We need to have that for the sake of our humanity. And one of the things I urge, and James Burgeon is here, the Holocaust galleries at the Imperial War Museum are impressive because as you go through them, you don't see statistics, you don't hear millions of voices. You read a voice of a person. And we need to remember that it is the individual who is the victim of tragedy. And in a way, when I wrote my Psalms, my burning Psalms, the image of my brother was a kind of constant presence because I needed to identify with the individual. I needed to identify with a particular voice that was resonating and echoing in my head. And for us, this cannot be only we can't be only concerned about our own pain.
Just a very, very short comment was interrupting your chance to ask the question, but just this, which is, I agree with every word you just said, but a lot of the Jewish community does not want to hear that. And you say that in public very loudly, and you can easily be, unfortunately, I know this from experience, you are in serious trouble.
You and me
but
both.
It is very coherent with the core of Jewish ethics.
And look, it just as one, I happen to have a favorite prophet of the various prophets.
Shall I guess?
Yes, of course.
And my goes Jeremiah.
Exactly. and but that's precisely the point. Look, it's extremely easy to say the populist thing. It's extremely easy to just say what people want to hear. And quite frankly, with apologies to people who are not here, there are a lot of rabbis who cop out by doing precisely that. They will tell you the easy thing, what people want to hear, and everybody leaves feeling good, and that's the end of it. The obligation is to tell people what they do not want to hear, but what they must hear.
I'm very loath to interrupt at all, but yes, absolutely, I applaud what you've said. Rabbi Wittenberg, I know that you do need to head off at about 20 past, so I did want to give you a chance to offer any reflections before you depart, because I don't think we'll have time for you to join the Q&A unless you are able to stay a little longer.
It's a half past.
Okay.
But pardon, I really just asked for forgiveness. When I heard about this, I said everyone should do it, but I had a teaching commitment, which actually follows on really well from this discussion afterwards.
Shall I open then to the floor to questions? Yes. Questions from the floor. Yes.
Okay, hi. So I took a different trajectory in that I converted to Judaism because of a lifetime spent studying the Holocaust, because I was stunned by the image of the father comforting his child on the edge of a pit at age 17. And that's just to kind of contextualize this question, which is, honestly, what would you do if you got an answer to these questions? What would you do if you got the answers to these questions?
Can you say a bit more about how the
Well,
background, how you
a lot of Menachem's poems and a lot of Menachem's rhetoric were questions, and they're angry and they're grief and they're so honest. But the thing that I found myself jotting down in the notes is, well, what would we do if you got the answers?
There is a very interesting Talmudic passage that I think relates to your question. I don't know how closely it relates to your question. And it comes really close to where we all start the Talmud, Tractate Brachot 3a. Rabbi Yossi goes into a ruin near the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, if we take the accounts that we have from the rabbinic period of the massive devastation and killings that followed the Roman destruction in 70, then we're dealing with a kind of don't want to use the same word, but maybe I should, Holocaust period. And if we don't believe them, then perhaps we're revisionists in the way we deniers of history.
Post-catastrophic.
Catastrophic. He goes into this ruin, he comes out, and he's chided for going into that place as if you're a poet, you shouldn't go in there. But then it's Elijah's. What did you hear? I heard a voice moaning like a dove. What did it say? It said, alack for the father that was forced to exile his children and has driven them out from their home into foreign lands. So if I were to intuit any kind of answer, it would be from a God in mourning and grief for the pain. And there's a line in the Talmud, what does God say? My head hurts. It will be a response from a God in desperate pain, saying, help me.
I don't know whether we will ever have an answer, and it doesn't matter, because silence can be part of a dialogue. And to me, the important thing is for us to ask the questions, to express our grievances, to express our pain. If there is an answer, look, we're not going to get the proverbial, thunderclap, lightning, and a voice booming from the heaven. I think that ship has passed. But if there is an answer that we get internally, then we will deal with the answer and we will grapple. There is no end point. But one thing is clear, we will not get an answer. We will never get an answer if we don't ask the question.
Well, can we just say a big thank you to Jonathan? Thank you. Jonathan, don't forget your peony.
Yeah. Okay, now, so if I forget now.
So I think, Menachem, you're happy to stay for a few more questions. Of course. Did you want to gather some? Yes, I'll pass this along. Please forgive me. Thank you so much for joining, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I was very, very moved and entirely agree with all your talk. But what I failed to hear from either of you I agree with remembering. We all need to remember. And there is no doubt that the Shoah is a seismic change in our Jewish history. No doubt. No one will doubt. But what I fail to hear from either of you is the word responsibility. God is not responsible for what's happening in Sudan, nor in Gaza, nor in Treblinka, nor in Congo. There is evil in the world, and that's not God's responsibility nor fault. So I would have been more calm if I would hear somewhere that not the fault is God's. It's not God's fault, but there is evil in the world. And I will not answer about Gaza, but there is one word, Hamas. The answer is probably elsewhere, not on the IDF.
Let me deal with this somewhat backward, because what you said is, I understand fully, and there is no way of suggesting that the responsibility for what happened in Gaza is not Hamas, and that the responsibility what happened during the Holocaust is not Nazi Germany. And I tried in my writings and my poems and my psalms not to suggest in any way that God was responsible for what happened, because the responsibility lies 100% with the perpetrators. What I tried to address was the absence of God, the silence of God, the failure of God to come to the rescue. And that is true whether it's in Gaza or in Treblinka or in Rwanda or in Darfur or in Srebrenica. Now, and I try to put that into my poetry, but having said that, we also have to bear in mind that evil and the perpetration of evil cannot be used as an excuse to commit evil. And I'm not suggesting it as and I'm not suggesting any kind of comparison, but the fact that Hamas is a genocidal organization that wishes to destroy Israel and kill Jews does not take away from us a responsibility to make sure that Palestinian women and Palestinian children and the Palestinian elderly are not protected to the extent possible. There are consequences of war, we all know them, but there is fortunately, the Israel government has now agreed to let humanitarian into Gaza. The Hamas on October 7th cannot be a reason to starve or to allow men, women, and children in Gaza to starve. And that is a reality that I believe we need it in order to preserve our own humanity, if nothing else.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Rarely a day goes past these days when I'm not reminded of Ahad Ha'am's essay, Half Solace. I think he was very prescient in being concerned about what would happen to the mindset of Jews when Jews integrated more with non-Jewish society. And, this may not be a popular position, but when I heard what that former chief of staff from the IDF said, I heard something different. I heard someone invoking the blood libel. And on the one hand, I think there are commonalities between genocides, and any life brutally taken is the tragic ending of a world entire. But I do think there are differences in genocides. And what is different about anti-Semitic racism, as far as I can see, and other racisms, is its world-explaining delusional nature that has persisted over time. And I think we can really only begin to understand the world and solve the problems of the world by seeing through that. And might there not be another moral position possible that has been actually taken by some journals in the last day or so, of putting moral pressure on Hamas to release all the food it has, and thereby stop feeding Hamas and end the war that way? Isn't that a moral position as well?
Look, I don't want to, the problem with morality is that morality is very nice if it's my morality. If it's somebody else's morality, I may have a problem with it. So I don't want to gauge into what is. My problem is that, and let me put it, you are correct. No genocide should be compared to another, and we can argue about the scope, but I will tell you that I have never heard of any victim or any subject of the unwanted attention saying, oh, it's not a Holocaust with gas chambers, it's only a genocide with machetes. I feel so much better. From when it comes to genocide, crimes against humanity, there are different parts of the equation. And the part of the equation that involves victims being killed cannot be discounted. I understand the argument, I fully understand the argument that if you starve out Hamas, maybe they will come to their senses. As a political matter, I am skeptical. If it hasn't worked for the past almost 2 years, I'm not sure that Hamas is almost all of a sudden going to have an epiphany. They are perfectly happy to let the Palestinians starve. But if we then do what the Hamas wants in starving the Palestinians in order that gets the Palestinians to become more radicalized, are we not then allying ourselves, consciously or not, with Hamas in helping them do exactly what they want to accomplish, to isolate Israel? What the general said was not meant as a blood libel. What he said was Israel and he has the right to say it. He is a former deputy chief of staff. He's an Israeli. He is there. He is part of it. It is a different, by the way, let me step back. I have never criticized or challenged any Holocaust survivor for the way they chose to deal with their experience. I will similarly not challenge an Israeli who is living in that experience in the way they wish to do it, whether it is from the right or from the left or from the center. But the fact that they take a position does not, in my opinion, absolve us from having a responsibility of seeing what are the consequences. And I have to say that I cannot sleep after seeing a whole series of small body bags with children outside a hospital in Gaza that is no longer functioning. And it doesn't matter who was responsible. The tragedy is the dead child. And unless we think of the tragedy of the dead child, then we are forgetting because, and the other part of it is what you mentioned. I'm sorry, anti-Semitism is a virulent hatred, but so is every bigotry that is challenging, that is questioning the humanity and the equality of another person. And it doesn't matter whether they are Roma or Sinti, whether they are Muslims, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's homophobia. Once you challenge somebody else's equality, I think you're going down a very dangerous path, but that's just my own reaction.
Thank you. We have technically reached the end of our time. So unless anyone has any questions they feel they really must ask now, I think we're going to draw the event to a close with a huge thank you to Menachem Rosensaft. So something I have to take responsibility for, there was a bit of a communication mix-up with the ordering of books on